The message came on a Tuesday. Not that the day mattered to the Galactic throne. They did not track their time in Earth cycles. They did not care what humans called their small rotations around their small star. But the humans would remember it as a Tuesday, and that small, ordinary detail would sit in history books for the next 1,000 years like a stone in a shoe. The message was short. The throne did not believe in wasting words on species that had not yet earned the right to hear them at length. It read, "You will surrender the governance of your world and all colonial holdings to the authority of the Galactic throne within 72 hours. Failure to comply will result in the total pacification of your home system. This is not a negotiation. This is a courtesy." 72 hours. They gave humanity 72 hours. The throne's ambassador, a tall, silver-skinned creature named Voth, who wore his status the way others wore armor, delivered the message personally to the United Earth Council chamber in Geneva. He stood at the center of the circular room with his hands folded behind his back and his chin lifted at the precise angle that communicated, in his species' body language, something between pity and boredom. He had delivered similar messages 11 times before, to 11 different species. Every one of them had either complied or ceased to exist. He expected the humans to cry. Some species wept. Some went silent. One had fainted collectively. All 12 of their council members hitting the floor in a kind of synchronized grief that Voth had actually found impressive in a biological sense. The humans looked at each other. That was it. That was the whole of their reaction. 41 council members in a circular room, and they all just looked at each other. A few of them wrote something down. One woman in the third row took a slow sip of her coffee. Voth waited. The Secretary General, a compact woman named Harlow, with silver hair cut close to her skull and eyes that had the particular flatness of someone who had stopped being surprised by anything decades ago, looked at the message on her screen for a long moment. Then she looked at Voth. "We'll be in touch," she said. Voth waited for more. There was no more. He left the chamber with the uncomfortable feeling of a man who had thrown a stone into a lake and heard no splash. The throne's fleet positioned itself at the edge of the Sol system 2 hours later. 412 warships. The smallest of them was 3 times the length of any vessel humanity had ever publicly launched. The largest, the command ship, the Eternal Ruin, where High Sovereign Vale sat in a throne made from the compressed cores of dead stars, was a thing that didn't look like a ship so much as a country that had decided to move. Vale himself was ancient in the way that made age meaningless. He had lived through the rise and fall of 4 galactic orders. He had watched species discover fire, and then watched them discover what fire could not stop. He was not cruel exactly. Cruelty implies caring enough to enjoy the suffering. Vale simply processed civilizations the way a river processes stones, smoothing them into compliance, wearing them down, carrying them along. He stood at the observation window of the Eternal Ruin and looked at Sol the way a man looks at a candle he is about to blow out. "Any response from the humans?" he asked. His aide, a nervous creature named Pellis who communicated anxiety through the involuntary brightening of his bioluminescent patches, flickered twice. "No." "Sovereign." "Silence." "Interesting." Vale tilted his head. "Fear sometimes presents as silence." "Yes, Sovereign." "Or denial." "Yes, Sovereign." Or he stopped. He did not finish the sentence. He had been about to say, "Or they are doing something else entirely." But the thought felt absurd, and Vale had not survived this long by entertaining absurd thoughts. Continue monitoring. In Geneva, the council chamber had emptied. Harlow sat alone at her desk on the 3rd floor of the building and made one phone call. It lasted 4 seconds. She said, "It's time." The person on the other end said, "Understood." That was the whole of it. She hung up. She finished her coffee. She looked out the window at the lake, which was gray and perfectly still in the February air, and she thought about a woman she had known 20 years ago, a colonial administrator named Pris, who had been on the first settlement on Kepler 442b when the throne's ships arrived to perform what they called a territorial recalibration. Pris had sent one transmission home before communications went down. It said, "They are not asking." Harlow still had the transmission saved. She had never deleted it. She had read it, she estimated, somewhere between 500 and 1,000 times. Not out of grief. She was past grief. Out of memory, because memory is what you build walls from. Commander Sarah Voss received her orders at the same moment Harlow made her call. She was in the engine room of the Unsev Reckoning when her communicator buzzed. She didn't look at the message immediately. She was watching one of her engineers, a young man named Tesk. Explain a calibration issue to the drive system in the patient. Reasoning tone of someone who believed the machine could hear him and respond better, if spoken to respectfully. Voss had 3 engineers who did this. She had never told any of them to stop. She read the message. She looked at it for the same amount of time Harlow had looked at the throne's ultimatum in Geneva. Then she said, to no one in particular, all hands to stations. Tesk stopped explaining things to the engine. Reckoning had been in cloaked orbit above Jupiter for 6 years. Before that, it had been assembled in the dark, piece by piece, in the shadow of Callisto, where the throne's long-range sensors did not bother to look because there was nothing there worth looking at. Before that, the designs had lived in a government vault for 9 years, and before that they had lived in the minds of 100 engineers, who had been quietly recruited and quietly housed and quietly given everything they needed, and quietly asked to build something that had never been built before. Quietly. Humans were good at quiet when they needed to be. Reckoning did not look like a human ship. This was intentional. The Throne's intelligence division had catalogued every human vessel ever launched, their shapes, their drive signatures, their hull compositions. Reckoning had been built to match none of those profiles. It had been built to match nothing in any database anyone had ever maintained. It was long. It was dark. Its hull was a composite material that had taken 14 years to develop and had no name yet, because the team that made it had simply been calling it the stuff for so long that the official designation never stuck. It absorbed sensor pings the way Blackfeld absorbs light, completely, without argument, without reflection. It did not look threatening. It looked like a question mark made of metal and patience. Voss walked from the engine room to the bridge the way she always walked, steadily, without urgency, with the kind of unhurried movement that is only possible in people who have already made their peace with whatever comes next. She was 53. Her hair was cut short and had been gray since her 30s, not from age but from something she didn't discuss. She wore no decoration. Her rank was not displayed anywhere on her uniform. This too was intentional. She sat in the command chair and looked at the navigation display. Jupiter hung massive and indifferent on the screen, its storm eye turning slowly, the way it had been turning for 400 years, and would keep turning long after everything happening today was settled, one way or another. Taris, she said. The alien, a lean sand-colored figure who stood slightly apart from the human crew, the way a person stands who is perpetually aware that they are a guest in someone else's house, turned from his translation station. His name, in his own language, was 17 syllables and used 3 frequencies of sound that human ears could not produce. He had accepted the name Taris with the equanimity of someone accustomed to compromise. He had defected from the throne 6 years ago. He did not talk about why. Commander, he said, when we decloak, Voss said, what will Vale's first instinct be? Taris was quiet for a moment, not the quiet of uncertainty. The quiet of someone choosing words with the care of a person selecting tools for a very specific job. Confusion, he said. Then threat assessment. Then, when the assessment fails to produce a classification, he paused. Something he has not felt in a very long time. Voss nodded. Good, she said. She looked at the display at Jupiter, at the small amber marker that represented where the throne's fleet was sitting. 412 ships strong, patient in the way that only the absolutely certain are patient. Take us out, Shed. The reckoning moved out of Jupiter's shadow without a sound. It crossed the distance between Jupiter and the inner system in a manner that the throne's sensor operators would later describe, in reports that used increasingly bewildered language, as not consistent with any known drive profile. It was not faster than throne vessels. It was simply different. The way it moved through space felt wrong to instruments calibrated to understand how ships moved. Like watching a word spelled with an alphabet you'd never seen before and knowing, somehow, that it was a word. It positioned itself between the throne fleet and Earth, one ship, against 412. The throne's sensors swept it immediately. The returns came back garbled. Hull composition unknown, drive signature unknown, weapons profile unknown, registry absent. The computer's classification system, which had successfully categorized every vessel it had ever scanned across 600 years of operation, produced one result. Unknown vessel type, no match found. On the bridge of the eternal ruin, the alert tone sounded. Vale turned from the window. Report. His tactical officer, a creature named Sev, who had served him for 40 years and had never once brought him news that surprised him. A vessel has decloaked between us and the human planet, Sovereign. One of theirs? Sev stopped. He looked at his screen. He looked at it the way you look at something when you need it to change its mind. We cannot determine that, Sovereign. Vale was still. You cannot determine, he said slowly, each word landing with separate weight, whether a ship belongs to the species we are currently in the process of issuing an ultimatum to. It matches no known human design. It matches no known design at all, Sovereign. Our systems have no reference for it. The bridge was quiet. Vale turned back to the window. There it was, a shape in the dark, long dark. Not moving, not broadcasting a distress signal or a negotiation request or a defiant declaration. Not doing anything at all, just there. He had done this 83 times. He had positioned his fleet above 83 civilizations, and he had watched them produce ships. Desperate ships. Brave ships. Ships that launched knowing they would lose, crewed by beings who died knowing it was coming. He had seen every permutation of how a civilization fights when it knows it has already lost. He had never seen one of them simply appear. No hailing frequencies, no demands, no speeches, just a ship that no one could classify, sitting between him and a planet that had said 2 words to him. We'll be in touch. Vale's fingers, long, jointed in one extra place, the color of old bone, pressed flat against the cold glass of the observation window. Open a channel, he said. The channel opened. Silence came back, long silence, comfortable silence, as though whatever was on the other end of it had no particular hurry, had never had a hurry, had been born without the gene for hurry, and had spent 50 years making peace with that. Then a voice. Human. Female. Unhurried. Sovereign Vale. Not a question, not a greeting quite, just the name set down like a chess piece. Vale let a beat pass before he answered. He was, whatever else he was, a creature of dignity. You are a single vessel, he said. Yes, the voice said, facing my fleet. Yes. Another silence. This is not a rational position, Vale said. The voice, when it came back, carried something in it that Vale's ancient translator rendered, with some difficulty, as the closest human equivalent of, you are not wrong, and that is the entire point. But what she actually said was simpler. We've had 72 hours, Commander Sarah Voss said. We used them. Vale stared at the shape in the dark. It still wasn't moving. It still wasn't doing anything. He had the strangest sensation. The first strange sensation he had experienced in something that might have been centuries. That whatever this ship was, whatever it contained, whatever it meant, it had been waiting for this specific moment for a great deal longer than 72 hours. Battle stations, he said quietly. His fleet moved into formation around him like a fist closing. The human ship did not move, it just waited. The way something waits when it is not afraid of what comes next. Vale did not speak first. This was deliberate. In 46 years of doing this, positioning his fleet above frightened worlds and watching civilizations make their final calculations, he had learned that silence, held long enough, becomes a kind of gravity. Things fall into it. Species that had stood defiant for centuries fell into that silence and never climbed back out. He waited. The human ship waited back, minute for minute, breath for breath. The channel between them stayed open and empty, a wire with nothing running through it, and the reckoning sat in the dark between his fleet and the blue-white marble of Earth like a nail someone had left in a doorway. Deliberate. A nail left in a doorway is not an accident. Vale finally said, you have positioned one vessel against 412. I know. The human said, you are aware that this is not a tactically defensible position. The human said nothing for a moment. When she spoke, her voice carried the particular flatness of someone who had already they were done explaining themselves to this conversation. Sovereign, she said, I'm not here to defend a position. Then what are you here to do? A pause. Short. Comfortable. Wait, she said. Vale's aide Pellis flickered twice. 3 times. His bioluminescent patches were doing something that, in the body language of his species, communicated the equivalent of, I don't think this is going well. Without requiring the professional courage to say it aloud, Vale ignored him. Waiting, Vale said, implies an expectation. What is it you expect to happen? I expect you to make a decision, Voss said. I'm giving you time to make a good one. The bridge of the eternal ruin was quiet in the specific way that rooms go quiet, when everyone in them is waiting for the senior person to react, so they know how they themselves are allowed to feel. 43 officers and crew members held their various configurations of breath. Vale's finger lifted. One gesture. The scout ship. Verith. Quick, blade-shaped, the thrown equivalent of a warning shot in physical form, broke from the fleet formation and crossed toward the human vessel. Not to destroy, to demonstrate. It crossed the gap in under a minute and fired a precision pulse at the reckoning's port side. A standard deterrent shot, the kind of thing that knocked shields down to 40% and made the crew inside stumble and rethink their life choices. The pulse hit the reckoning. The reckoning did not stumble. It did not flash. It did not list. Its running lights did not flicker. The ship sat in exactly the position it had been sitting in before the shot, unchanged in every measurable way. The same dark needle in the same dark cloth. And the only indication that anything had happened at all was a small readout on Admiral Koss's tactical board that said, in the throne's equivalent of plain language, "Impact confirmed, effect none detected." Koss looked at the readout. He looked at it the way you look at something when you need it to have made a mistake. He ran the scan again. Impact confirmed, effect none detected. He ran it a third time, same result. He set the scanner down with the deliberate care of a man who has just received information he has not yet decided what to do with, and he looked at the human ship through the viewport. And he did something he had not done since he was a young officer 30 years ago, encountering his first real unknown. He started doing math in his head, on the reckoning. Tesk looked up from his station. "They shot at us," he said. This was observation, not alarm. He had a gift for stating obvious things in the tone of someone gently updating a shared document. "Yes," Voss said. "We're fine." "Yes." "Should I?" "No," Voss said. Tesk nodded and went back to his board. Terrace was watching Voss from his station. Not the viewport, not the tactical readout, not the place where the throne's scout ship was now sitting at confused rest 50 kilometers off their port bow. He was watching Voss because, in 6 years aboard this ship, he had learned that Voss's face, when she was working through something, went completely still in the specific way that very deep water is still not calm. Exactly. But containing too much weight to be disturbed by surface things. She was very still right now. "They'll try again," Terrace said quietly. "Different kind of shot," Voss said. It was not a question. "They'll escalate to a disruption beam. It doesn't destroy. It destabilizes. Power systems, crew equilibrium. It's designed to be uncomfortable rather than lethal. A reminder of what comes next. And when that doesn't work." Terrace was quiet for a moment. "Vale will open the channel again," he said. "He'll want to understand. He is not a man who proceeds into ignorance willingly. He'll want to classify this, you the ship, the situation, before he decides what force to apply." Voss nodded, she said. "We want him curious, Commander." Terrace paused. He had a way of pausing before he said things that mattered. A half-second gap. A single breath's worth of space. Vale has been doing this for a very long time. His curiosity is not neutral. He will look for weakness in what he doesn't understand. And if he finds what he thinks is a pattern, he will stop being curious and start being dangerous. Voss turned in her chair and looked at him. "What does Vale fear most?" she asked. This was the same question she had asked him 6 hours ago, in the preparation room, before the cloak dropped. But she was asking it differently now, not planning, not rehearsing. She was asking it the way a surgeon asks for a specific tool mid-procedure. Terry said, "Not losing, he has lost before and adapted. What Vale fears is irrelevance, the possibility that the machinery he has built, the certainty he has accumulated might simply not apply." Voss held his gaze for a moment. "Good," she said again. She turned back to the viewport. She opened the channel. "Sovereign," she said, "I'm going to say something to you. 11 words. I'd like you to have your translators working at full capacity when I say them. On the eternal ruin." Vale straightened. Whatever he had been expecting, demands, pleas, defiance, the particular desperate eloquence of a species delivering its final speech. It had not been this. "Proceed," he said. Voss said, "We know what you did to Kepler 442b. We remember everything." 11 words. The channel stayed open. Voss said nothing else. She had said the thing, and now she was simply done saying it, sitting with it, letting it exist in the space between the ships the way a stone exists in water after you drop it, having no further relationship with the ripples. The throne's translation chamber erupted, not loudly. It was a quiet eruption, the kind that happens when 12 specialists begin talking over each other in the careful, controlled tones of people who are pretending not to be alarmed. The senior translator, a creature named Hess, who had translated for Vale for 20 years, and prided herself on finding the precise meaning behind every alien utterance, was arguing with 2 of her colleagues about what "remember" meant in this context. Not the word itself, the word was simple, the weight of it, because remember implies duration. Remember implies recording. Remember. implies that the thing that was remembered had not simply passed through the species that experienced it and left them diminished, as the throne understood trauma to work, but had instead been kept, stored, carried, nursed. Their saying has said slowly that they have been aware of Kepler 442b for the full period since the incident, that they have held it in active memory for. She stopped, did the calculation, said the number in a voice that came out smaller than she intended. For 200 years. Silence in the translation chamber. That's not how species process loss, said one of her colleagues. No, Hess said. It is not. Admiral Koss was still doing math. He had moved from his tactical station to a secondary console in the back corner of the bridge, the kind of move that officers make when they want to run numbers without anyone watching them run numbers, and he had been there for 23 minutes. He was looking at the reckoning, not what it had done, what it had not done. It had absorbed a pulse shot with no measurable effect. Fine, exotic hull materials existed. Unknown hull composites were rare but not impossible. He had encountered 2 other species with advanced passive defense in his career, but the ship had not returned fire, had not raised anything that scanned as a shield or active defense, had not maneuvered, had not, in any detectable way, reacted to being shot at. And Koss, who had spent 40 years thinking about how ships behave under fire, understood that there were 2 kinds of things that did not react to being shot at. The first kind had no choice. Their systems were damaged, or they lacked the weapons to respond, or they were simply helpless. Helpless things did not react because reacting was beyond them. The second kind did not react because they had already decided not to, because they were waiting for something, because not reacting was, itself, the response. Koss looked at the reckoning. He thought about what it meant to build a ship, hide it, wait 200 years, and then park it between your planet and the most powerful fleet in the known galaxy without raising a single weapon. He thought about what kind of patience that required, what kind of certainty. He looked at the scan results again. Effect, none detected. He looked at the hull composite reading that his system had tried 6 times to classify and given up on 6 times. He looked at the drive signature that matched nothing in any database he had ever accessed. He closed the console. He went back to his station. He said nothing to Vale. Not yet. He was still working through it, carrying it the way you carry something heavy that you have not yet decided where to set down. But for the first time in 30 years, Admiral Koss felt the faint and deeply unfamiliar sensation of a man who might be standing on the wrong side of something. On the reckoning. Taris watched the throne fleet, not with instruments. He was watching through the viewport with his own eyes, in the way he had watched the throne do things for the 60 years of his life. Before he decided he could not keep watching and had to leave. He knew their formation patterns. He knew what eternal ruin looked like from the outside when Vale was thinking. The way the ship itself seemed to hold still in a different way, a listening stillness rather than an idle one. The ship was listening. He's going to reopen the channel, Taris said. Voss was already looking at the comm board. It lit up. She did not answer immediately. She let it sit lit for 30 seconds. The same 30 seconds Vale had made her wait at the beginning, returned without comment. Then she touched the open signal. Sovereign. What happened to Kepler 442b, Vale said, was a territorial accident. A miscalculation during early expansion. It was documented as such. Voss said nothing. It was not an act of aggression, Vale said. Voss said nothing. We acknowledged. You documented it, Voss said. There's a difference between a document and an acknowledgement, Sovereign. A document is a thing you write. An acknowledgement is a thing the other party accepts. Silence. Did we accept it? Voss said. The channel hummed. No, she said. We didn't. And then, because the thing she had just said was the whole of what needed saying, she closed the channel. The reckoning sat in the dark, still not moving, still not raising a weapon, still doing the most frightening thing it could possibly do, which was nothing at all, with the absolute composure of something that has already decided how this ends and is simply waiting for everyone else to catch up. In the back of his mind, behind everything else, Koss's math kept running. He didn't like where it was going. The Throne's intelligence division had a room for this. They called it the clarification room, which was the kind of name that meant the opposite of what it said. It was where analysts went when things made no sense and needed to be made, through sufficient application of expertise and computing power, into something that made sense. It had worked every time before. It was not working now. 12 analysts, 8 active scan feeds, 1 ship on the display screen that their instruments kept trying to understand, and kept failing to understand in new and creative ways, like a door with a lock their keys didn't fit, and every time they tried a new key it turned out to not be a lock at all, but something else entirely wearing a lock's shape. Hull composite, said the lead analyst, a creature named Orin, who had spent 30 years classifying materials, and who communicated confidence the way other beings communicated hunger, constantly, reflexively as a basic biological function. Run it again, the system ran it again. Material class unclassified, no analysis compound in database. That's not possible, said the analyst next to him. Run it again, Orin said. They ran it again, same result. Orin looked at the number on his screen that represented the hull's energy absorption rating, the measurement of how much a material could absorb before it began to fail, and he looked at it for a long time, the way a man looks at a bill he cannot pay. The number was not wrong. The number was simply big. Big in the way that made the pulse shot Varath had fired look like a child throwing a pebble at a mountain and expecting an apology. He looked at the drive signature scan. No match. He looked at the weapon's profile. Unable to determine, no detectable weapon ports. He looked at the energy readings from inside the vessel, the heat signatures, the power output, the electromagnetic signature that every ship leaked whether it wanted to or not, the fingerprint that you could not hide any more than you could hide the fact that you were breathing. The reckoning had a power output that did not match its size. It was too much, not slightly too much, not the kind of discrepancy that suggested a more efficient engine. The kind of discrepancy that suggested they were reading one floor of a building and assuming they had read the whole building. Orin set down his stylus. He picked it up. He set it down again. Get me Koss, he said. Koss was already coming. He arrived at the clarification room before the message reached him, because he had been walking the ship for the last 40 minutes, doing what Koss did when something was wrong, and he couldn't name it yet. Moving, thinking in motion. He had been a walker his whole career. His first commanding officer had called it a nervous habit. He had privately called it the only thing that worked. He looked at Orin's screen. He looked at the hull absorption number. He sat down, not because he needed to sit, because his legs made the decision before his mind caught up. How long, he said, would it take to build something like this? Orin opened his mouth, closed it, ran the calculation. With our current materials science, 30 years, maybe 40. If you started from nothing and worked continuously. And if you started from a different place than we started from, Koss said, and you had 200 years. Orin looked at him. The room was quiet in the way rooms go quiet, when something has just been said that everyone in the room immediately understood, and immediately wished they didn't. 203 years ago, on a planet that the humans had named Kepler 442b but called, among themselves, New Galway, because the settlers were mostly Irish and Scottish and had the specific stubbornness of people who had already left one home and were not about to treat the second one carelessly. A throne expansion fleet had arrived without warning. The throne's records described what followed as a territorial miscalculation. The human records, the ones that survived, that were transmitted in fragments on dying frequencies, that arrived on Earth over the course of 6 days as the relay stations went offline one by one, like a string of lights being unplugged from the wrong end, described it differently. 8,417 people. The number was not classified. It was not hidden. Every child in every school on Earth knew it the way they knew their own name. The teachers did not make them memorize it. They did not need to. It moved through generations the way certain things move, not as information, but as temperature. You did not learn it. You absorbed it. It was simply there in the room whenever anyone talked about the throne. Whenever anyone talked about the stars. Whenever anyone talked about what came next. 8,417. The throne had sent a formal statement 6 months later. They called it a miscalculation. They offered what they described as appropriate acknowledgement. They used the word regrettable. 4 times in one paragraph, humanity had sent one reply. It said, received. And then humanity had gone quiet. 11 years later, the first design meeting for what would eventually become the reckoning was held in a basement in Wellington, New Zealand, by 4 engineers who had been told they were working on long-range deep space exploration infrastructure. They were told this by people who knew exactly what they were working on. Voss walked her ship. She did this when she needed to think, which looked, to anyone watching, identical to her simply walking, because Voss did not perform thinking. It just happened, somewhere behind her eyes, while her feet handled the mechanics of existing. She walked from the bridge aft, through the corridor that ran the spine of the reckoning, past the engineering bays and the secondary power rooms, and the sections of the ship that had no designation in any official document because their existence was not supposed to be officially documented. She stopped at a door marked, in plain stenciled letters, "Secondary Systems Authorized Only." She pressed her hand to the panel. The door opened. She walked in. The room was large, larger than it should have been, given the ship's external dimensions, because the reckoning's external dimensions were, by design, not its actual dimensions. It had been built with what the engineers had called, with the quiet humor of people doing something they understood was slightly insane, a generous interior. The hull was thick with things that did not register as weapons because they were not, technically, weapons. They were solutions. The engineers had been very precise about this distinction. Voss stood in the room and looked at what humanity had spent 200 years building. She stood there for a while, not because she needed to look at it. She had seen it 1,000 times, because it was good, sometimes, to stand in front of the thing and remember what it meant, what it cost, what the 8,417 had not known they were buying. She thought about New Galway. She thought about the way the signals had come in, one by one, 6 days. Her mother had been 6 years old when the last one arrived, and she didn't remember it the way adults remember things, as an event with a before and after, but as a thing that was simply always there, in the texture of the house, in the way her grandmother stopped being loud. Some things, Voss thought, you do not decide to carry. They just stay. The channel opened without warning. She was back on the bridge when it happened. Eternal ruin. Opened a hailing frequency, and the voice that came through was not Vael's. It was Koss. Koss, who had a voice like cold iron and who was, from everything Terrace had ever told her, the most dangerous person in that fleet, not because he was cruel, but because he was exact. "Commander," he said, just the title, no name, no rank. "Merle," she said, same, a short silence, the productive kind. "I've been looking at your ship," Koss said. "I know. The numbers don't work," he said. "By any model I run, they don't work." "Which model are you using?" Voss said. Another silence, longer. "All of them," Koss said. Voss said nothing. She was giving him the space to get to the thing he actually wanted to say, which was not about numbers. She could feel it, the shape of what he was building toward, the way you feel the shape of a room in the dark before your eyes adjust. "How long?" Koss said. "Did it take you to build this?" "We didn't build it," Voss said. "It built itself. We just kept showing up." The silence this time had a different texture. "How many more are there?" Koss said. Not a question quite. The inflection of a man performing the math out loud in a stranger's ear, hoping the stranger will tell him he's wrong. Voss said nothing. 300 kilometers off the reckoning. Port side. Exactly where the sensor shadow of Jupiter's gravity well would make a throne scanner blink twice and then correct for interference. 3 shapes held still in the dark, not warship-shaped, longer, wider, the kind of shape that a warship was the way a knife is a scalpel related, but not the same order of thing. They had been there for 6 hours. They decloaked on Voss's signal, not all at once, one at a time, with a 3-second gap between each, because Voss's chief engineer had once told her that information lands harder when you give each piece its own moment to breathe. First ship. 3 seconds. Second ship. Third ship. The throne's sensors erupted. Not literally. They were instruments. They did not have feelings. But every alarm, every classification alert, every unknown vessel flag in the fleet system fired simultaneously. And on the bridge of the eternal ruin, the sound was the kind of sound that makes trained military officers go very still before they do anything else. Koss looked at his board. 4 ships, now, total, where there had been one, and the 3 new ones. His system was trying to classify them the same way it had tried to classify the reckoning, with the same result, but the size readings were coming back in numbers that made the reckoning look like it was the smaller thing, and the reckoning had already made his carrier fleet look like. He stopped that thought. He picked it up again because he was Koss and he did not put down problems, just because they were uncomfortable. He looked at the size readings. He looked at them. He said quietly, to no one in particular, "What did they build?" It was not a question. It was the sound a lock makes when the right key finally turns. Not triumphant, just open. On the eternal ruin. Vael turned from the viewport, where he had been watching the 3 new shapes appear in the dark. His face did not change. His hands were very still against the glass. All weapons, he said, softly. The soft voice that Vale used when he had made a decision, and the decision was final. Target the lead vessel, Sovereign, Koss said. All weapons, Vale said. Same tone, same soft final weight. Koss looked at his board, at the 4 ships, at the numbers that kept coming back wrong. He thought about the 200 years. He thought about what you build when you have 200 years. And a reason that doesn't go away. He thought about what you do not build, the things you leave out, the choices you make, the weapons you could have included but didn't, and what it means when something that clearly could have been a weapon is not a weapon. He gave the order. His hands, when he did it, were steady. His mind was not. 412 ships opened fire. That is the number. Hold it. 412. The light alone should have been enough. The combined output of that much weapons fire in one system, at one target, would have been visible from the surface of Earth with the naked eye. A new star briefly born and briefly burning in the space between Jupiter and nothing. People standing on rooftops in Lahore and Lagos and Lima would later say they saw a flash. Then dark, then the same dark as before. Unchanged, unbroken, the stars sitting exactly where they had always been, patient in the way that stars are patient, which is to say absolutely and without any awareness of what patience even costs. Reckoning was still there, still dark, still long, still exactly where it had been before 412 ships decided to end it, on the Darius. Eternal ruin. No one spoke, not for 11 full seconds. Koss counted them. He was a counter, had always been a counter, a man who put numbers between himself and chaos the way other people put furniture in front of doors. 11 seconds of a bridge full of trained military officers, doing nothing but staring at a ship that should have been a debris field, and was instead a ship. The readouts were reporting the same thing they had reported before. Effect, none detected. All of them. Every weapon type, every output level, every beam and pulse and disruption wave that the most powerful fleet in the known galaxy had, just poured into one target at simultaneous full capacity. None detected. Run diagnostics, someone said, not an order. The voice of a person saying the only rational thing left to say, which was, maybe the instruments are broken. Maybe the problem is the measuring, not the thing being measured. Maybe we hit it and we just can't tell. Koss knew the instruments were not broken. He looked at the reckoning. It moved. Not away, not evasive, it turned. Slow, deliberate, the way a person turns in a conversation when they've decided it's their turn to speak, and it oriented itself toward the nearest thrown warship in the formation. A cruiser. Veldar. 40,000 crew. Front line of the fleet. Koss's hand moved toward the order board. The reckoning. Fired, one shot, clean, narrow, a beam that his instruments categorized after 3 attempts as directed electromagnetic pulse, highly localized. It hit the Veldar at a specific point on its lower hull, a point that Koss recognized after a half-second of cold understanding as the exact location of the ship's primary power coupling, the one junction that, if disabled, took the whole grid down, not the weapons, not the crew, not the engines, the grid. Veldar. Went dark, 40,000 crew, alive ship, intact, not a scratch on the hull, just dark drifting. A ship turned into a very large, very expensive piece of metal with no power and no threat. Koss stared at it. One shot. They had needed one shot, and the shot had not been chosen to destroy. It had been chosen the way a surgeon chooses, not to hurt the most, but to stop the specific thing that needed stopping, with the minimum material necessary and not 1 unit more. The reckoning. That turned again. The Veldar was already behind it. It lined up on the next ship in the formation. Voss did not watch the targeting display. She watched Terrace. Terrace was watching the throne fleet with the particular expression of a man reading a text in his first language after years of reading it in translation, not surprise, exactly, recognition. The precise recognition of someone who knows these people, who grew up inside their logic, who understands not just what they do but why the doing of it feels to them like sense. He hasn't called yet, Terrace said. No, he will. When the 3rd ship goes dark. A pause. Vale operates on 3s. First is data, 2nd is pattern, 3rd is personal. Voss nodded. The 2nd throne warship went dark. Then the 3rd. The comm lit up. Enough. Vale's voice, stripped of everything that usually lived inside it. The texture of authority. The particular warm weight of a being who has never been told no by anything that survived the telling. Just the word. Flat. A stone on a table. Voss let it sit. You are disabling my ships, Vale said. Yes, not destroying them. No, a silence that had a shape to it. The shape of a very old, very certain creature standing at the edge of a thing it had not known existed and looking down. Why? Vale said. Voss said. Because we don't need to. 3 seconds for. You are telling me, Vale said slowly, with the precise diction of someone who learned to speak carefully in the specific school, of having once said the wrong thing, and watched a civilization end over it, that you are capable of destroying this fleet and you are choosing not to. Yes. That is not a military posture, Vale said. That is. He stopped. Started again. What do you want? The same thing we've wanted for 200 years, Voss said. To be left alone. Vale said. You built all of this, you hid it for 200 years, you waited. And what you want is to be left alone. We also want you to understand something, Voss said. There's a difference. What do you want me to understand? Voss was quiet for a moment, long enough that it started to feel like she wasn't going to answer. Long enough that the silence grew its own weight. That we could, she said. The channel stayed open, neither of them closed it. Vale turned from the comm. He walked to the viewport, his hands, long, jointed in that extra place. Old as things get and keep working. Pressed flat against the glass. He looked at the dark shapes of his disabled ships, 3 of them, sitting lightless in space the way buildings sit after a blackout, structurally whole, functionally absent, embarrassed in the specific way that only large things can be embarrassed. Pellis flickered. Vale ignored him. He was thinking about the word could. In 46 campaigns across 600 years, no species had ever said that to him. They had said, we will. They had said, you cannot. They had said, we surrender. In 17 different constructions, some of them quite elegant. One species had said nothing at all and simply detonated their own planet, which Vale still thought about sometimes in the small hours of ship night, not with guilt. He had processed guilt out of himself long ago, as one processes an inefficiency, but with the flat metallic curiosity of a thing he had never been able to fully classify. Could. Not have. Will. Not. Have. Could. Humanity had just disabled 3 of his warships, with the stated energy of someone illustrating a point, not winning an argument, and then offered him the information that this was demonstration, not commitment, that there was a ceiling above this that he had not yet seen. He pressed his hand harder against the glass. The silence cannon, he said. Pellis stopped flickering. The bioluminescent patches on his body went to something that, in the emotional vocabulary of his species, was not quite fear and not quite grief but lived in the postal district between them. Sovereign, he said, carefully, the single word carrying, for those who knew how to read it, the full weight of, please don't. Prepare it, Vale said. The silence cannon was not a weapon in the way that weapons are weapons. Weapons are designed to take. The silence cannon was designed to end. It was the throne's final argument, the thing they had built not to use but to have. Not as a tool but as a sentence, a full stop in physical form. It fired once and a star went quiet, and everything that had been living in the warmth of that star went quiet with it. And the throne had fired it twice in its history, once as a demonstration, once as a punishment. And both times the rest of the galaxy had gone very still in the way that rooms go still when someone turns over a table. The throne called it deterrence. Everyone else called it by what it was. Koss looked at the activation order on his board. He looked at it for a long time. He thought about the reckoning, about its hull that absorbed everything without reply, about the drive signature that fit no profile, about the 3 ships that had decloaked. Not warships, bigger. And what it meant to build something bigger than a warship and not classify it as a weapon. He thought about 200 years, about what you do not build when you have 200 years and choose not to build it, about the specific, deliberate restraint of that, about disabled ships instead of debris fields, about because we don't need to. He thought, what does a species that builds this and hides it and waits, and then fires to disable rather than destroy? What does that species do when you aim a starkiller at their home? He gave the order. His hands were steady, on the reckoning. The alarm tone sounded once. Voss looked at her board. She looked at the reading. The silence cannon's charge signature was unmistakable. It leaked a specific frequency when it powered up, a frequency you could not shield or hide, a frequency that was designed to be unmistakable, because the whole point of the weapon was that you knew it was coming. It was coming. Voss sat back in her chair, she said, open the secondary panels, her weapons officer, A man named Cho, who had been quietly doing crosswords at his station for the last 40 minutes, set down his stylus. He looked at her. "Commander, open them," she said. Cho entered the command sequence. Along the reckonings hull, the long, dark, unclassifiable hull that had absorbed everything the throne had thrown at it and returned nothing, a second set of panels began to open, not weapons ports, not shield emitters, something else, something that had no name in any throne database because it had no name in any human database either, because the team that built it had simply been calling it the other thing for so long that the designation had never arrived. Terrace looked at the panels opening on the exterior camera feed. His face did the thing it did when he recognized something. Not surprised, just recognition, the quiet, settling recognition of a man who has spent 6 years believing something without proof and has just received the proof. He said, very quietly, "You were waiting for them to use it." Voss said nothing. The whole time, Terrace said. The decloaking, the demonstration, the disabled ships. You needed him to escalate to the cannon. Voss looked at the throne fleet on her display, at the building charge signature, at the weapon that had ended 2-star systems gathering its breath for a third. "We needed him to show it to us," she said. The panels finished opening. The reckoning waited. The silence cannon charged, fired. The silence cannon fired. Every instrument on every ship in the throne fleet confirmed it. The charge log showed full discharge. The targeting system showed a clean solution. The energy output, recorded to the 16th decimal place by 3 independent systems, was exactly what it was supposed to be, enough to quiet a star, delivered in a single coherent beam at the long dark shape sitting between the fleet and the blue planet it had come to protect. The beam hit. The reckoning sat in it the way a stone sits in a river, not absorbing it, not deflecting it. Something else, something that had no entry in the throne's physics library, a word they did not have yet, a concept wearing the shape of a gap where a concept should be. The beam passed through the open secondary panels, came out the other side, not weakened, not scattered, changed. The beam that hit the was a weapon. The beam that left it was something that Koss's instruments categorized, after a long pause that felt almost embarrassed, as containment field, closed loop, inert. The silence cannon shot was still out there, all of it, every unit of energy, folded, held, sitting in a bubble 30 kilometers off the reckonings. Aft end like a fire someone had put in a jar. Reckoning had caught it, and held it, the way you hold something dangerous while you decide what to do with it, with the steady hands of someone who is not afraid of what they are holding. The bridge of the eternal ruin did not erupt, it went the other way, so far into silence that the silence had a weight to it, a physical presence, a thing you could have reached out and touched. 43 officers, not one of them breathing at their full capacity. Koss looked at his board. He looked at the containment field. He set his stylus down. It rolled off the edge of his console and fell to the floor and made a small sound and no one moved to pick it up. It lay there. It was the loudest thing in the room. The channel opened. Voss opened it. Not Vale, Voss. Sovereign, she said. A long wait, then Commander. His voice was the same. She had expected that. Vale was not a man whose voice changed. His voice had lived through things that changed species and come out the other side intact. But underneath it, underneath the exact, controlled cadence of it, there was something that had not been there before. Not fear, quite. Something adjacent to it. The thing that lives next door to fear in very old, very certain creatures who have just discovered a wall they didn't know existed. The weapon you just fired, Voss said. We've had its frequency on file for 160 years, since you used it the first time. Silence. The secondary panels, she said, were built for it. The silence this time was different. It was not the silence of someone waiting to respond. It was the silence of someone performing a very fast and very unpleasant recalculation about the shape of the last hour. You needed us to fire it, Vale said. We needed to show you that we had an answer for it. Voss said, there's a difference. Another silence. A long one. Vale said, what are you? Not. What do you want? Not. What are your terms? Not any of the questions that come from a position. Just the raw thing, stripped of everything. The oldest question, the one you only ask when you are standing in front of something that has reorganized your understanding of the possible. What are you? Voss was quiet for a moment. We're the species, she said, that you hit first. She stood up. She walked to the viewport, something she rarely did. She was not a viewport person. She thought better in chairs. in the contained space of the command position, her hands close to the boards. But she walked to the glass and she looked at the throne fleet. 412 ships, 3 of them dark. One of them now sitting across from a closed loop of its own ultimate weapon. And she let herself look at it the way she had not let herself look at anything for the entire operation. Not tactically, just looked. 412 ships. She thought about New Galway, about the signals coming in over 6 days, one by one, about her mother at 6 years old sitting on a grandmother's lap that had gone rigid, about the word regrettable 4 times in one paragraph, and the single word humanity had sent back. Received. Not accepted, not forgiven, not forgotten. Received. We got the message. We know what you are. We will not say anything else right now. Not because we have nothing to say, because what we have to say takes 200 years to build. She pressed her hand against the glass. Why? Vale said. Not. Why did you build this? Not. Why didn't you retaliate sooner? Just the one word. Ask the way you ask when you mean all of the above and none of the above, and something underneath all of it that you don't have. The precise vocabulary for yet. Voss took her hand off the glass. She turned back to the bridge, to Terrace at his station, to Tesk at engineering, who had gone very still in the way he went still when things mattered, all the gentle machine whispering gone out of him. To Cho, who had not picked up his crossword. To all of them, she said, into the open channel, because we're not you. 3 seconds. You hit us, she said. You called it a miscalculation, and you wrote it in a document, and you moved on. Because that's what you do. Something gets in the way of what you want, and you remove it. And then you move forward, and you don't look back, because looking back is not how you're built. She walked back to her chair, sat down. We looked back, she said. We kept looking back. Every year for 200 years. We looked back at what you did, and we decided what to do with it. And what did you decide? Vale said. Voss said. We decided to make sure it couldn't happen again. The channel breathed. Not to punish you, she said. Not to take what you have. Not to sit across from every species you've ever done this to and build an empire on the same bones you built yours on. A pause. Small. Exact. Just to make sure it couldn't happen again. Vale was quiet. A long time. The longest silence of the conversation. And this conversation had been built from silences the way other structures are built from steel. Finally, you could end this fleet. Right now. You could take that energy you are holding and redirect it, and, yes, Voss said, but you won't know why. Voss looked at the ceiling of the bridge, at the metal above her head. The stuff. 14 years to develop, no name anyone agreed on, and she thought about 8,417 people who had not done anything to deserve what they got, who had gone out to a new world with their particular stubbornness, and their particular hope, and their seeds, and their books, and their arguments, about what to name the mountains. And she thought about what you owe them, what the living owe the dead, who made the living careful. Because we remember what it felt like, she said, to have something done to us that didn't need to happen. The channel was quiet. We're not interested in teaching you that feeling, she said. We're interested in making sure you understand we could. She reached forward. Stand down your fleet, Sovereign, go home. And tell whoever asks, tell them humanity says hello. She closed the channel. Vale stood at his window for a long time. Pellis did not speak, did not flicker. He had the sense, the specific, biological sense of a creature that has spent 20 years reading a room, that speaking right now would be the wrong kind of wrong. Vale looked at the Gimp. Reckoning. He had been doing this for 600 years, 46 campaigns, 11 species brought into compliance, 3 that had not survived the attempt, 1 that had, and he still thought about them occasionally, turned their planet into a monument to refusal. He had never stood down, not once. In 600 years of this, he had never looked at what was in front of him and said, "This is the thing I don't continue past." He said it now, not out loud, not to Pellis, not to his fleet. He said it in the private interior of whatever was left in him that was still capable of saying things that weren't orders. Then he gave the order to stand down. His fleet moved. 412 ships, minus 3 dark ones, turning in the slow, enormous way that very large things turn, not elegant, not graceful, efficient in the specific way of things that have no need to perform their power for anyone. They turned away from Earth. Reckoning. Did not cheer. There was no announcement over the ship's intercom. No music. Tesk did not go back to talking to the engine. Cho did not pick up his crossword. The bridge held what it held. The weight of the last several hours. The weight of the 200 years before them. The weight of 8,417 names that none of them said out loud, because they didn't need to. Voss watched the fleet go. She watched it for a while. Then she said, to no one in particular, recall the secondary panels, discharge the containment field into the buffer. Commander. Cho, what do we do with the energy? Voss thought about it. Vent it into the collection system, she said. Run it through the drive. A pause. We'll use it to go home, she said. Terrace found her in the corridor 20 minutes later. She was walking again. Just walking. The thinking kind of walking. The kind that looked identical to ordinary walking but wasn't. He fell into step beside her. They walked together in the way people walk, when they have been in the same place long enough that silence between them is not absence but presence. After a while he said, do you think he understood? Voss thought about it. Not the tactical question, not the strategic one, the actual question, which was about Vale in the specific, and about whether what had passed between them today was the beginning of a different kind of thing, or just a pause in the same old one. No, she said. Terrace nodded. He had expected that, but Koss did, she said. Terrace looked at her. Koss did the math, she said. He'll keep doing it, and every answer he gets will be the same answer. She looked at the corridor ahead of her, the plain metal walls, the stenciled markings, the utilitarian bones of a ship built to last rather than to impress. You change a civilization through the people in it who cannot stop thinking about the thing you showed them. Terrace was quiet. Then, what do we do now? Voss walked. Reckoning. Moved around her, hum of drive, breath of circulation systems, the small sounds of a ship that had been built by people who showed up every day for 200 years, because they believed in the thing they were building, even when the thing was still theoretical, still a drawing, still a conversation in a basement in Wellington between 4 engineers who called it long-range exploration infrastructure, and knew exactly what they meant. We go home, Voss said. They walked. And then, Terrace said. Voss did not answer for a long time. The reckoning recloaked around them. The stars outside the viewports disappeared behind the dark. The long, deliberate dark that no scanner had ever found a way through. The dark that humanity had spent 14 years learning to make. We keep building, she said, in the empty space where the reckoning had been. Koss stood alone on the bridge of a ship that was very slowly rejoining a fleet that was very slowly going home. He looked at the coordinates where the human ship had been. Nothing there now. Just space. Just the ordinary dark. The same dark that had been there before any of this and would be there after all of it. He thought about the numbers. About what you build when you have 200 years and a reason that does not go away. About disabled ships instead of debris fields. About a weapon caught and held and used to go home. About 11 words. We know what you did to Kepler 442b. We remember everything. He thought about what it means to remember everything. What it costs. What it makes you. He thought about that for a long time. He did not pick up his stylus. Terrace was the last one to leave the observation deck. He stood at the viewport after Voss had gone. After the crew had gone back to their stations and their crosswords, and their conversations with engines. He stood alone and looked at the dark outside, which was the same dark in every direction, indistinguishable, patient. He thought about the throne. He thought about leaving it. He thought about the day he had walked off a throne vessel with a single bag, and a reason he still did not talk about, and the way the human intake officer had looked at his paperwork and then at him and said, without any particular inflection, welcome, and nothing else, which was the whole of what he had needed. He thought about what Voss had said. We're not interested in teaching you that feeling. He pressed his hand against the glass. The dark held still. Outside, somewhere in it, the throne fleet was going home. And somewhere else in it, cloaked, quiet, patient in the way that humanity had become patient, which was the deepest and most deliberate kind. The rest of what humanity had built kept holding still, waiting, the way it had always waited, the way it would keep waiting, until it didn't need to anymore.